Good evening, guys. You can tell it's evening because I have to swap. I have to come out of the kitchen and into my little study because the kids are then hopefully my husband will be home in a minute and feed the kids some tea. But welcome to our evening sessions. We've got 3 sessions left in the festival. I can't believe there's only 3 left. Delighted to be talking to Anne from Planet Aware. She's going to talk to us about circular fashion. What does it mean and how we can do it at home? I always love that. It's all very well talking about these lofty principles of donut economies and all this sort of thing, but unless I know exactly what I can do about it at home, it means nothing to me. So hopefully by now everyone knows we've got the chat box on the right hand side, already lots of hellos and chats and things in there. If you've got any questions, ask a question in the little ask a question box at the bottom, and I will jump back on at the end and run through those with Anne. But for now, I'm going to disappear. I'll still be around, Anne, if you need me, but I'm going to shut up and hand over to you. So thanks ever so much.
Thank you ever so much, Jane. Jen, it's been really fabulous festival, and I've enjoyed dipping into a load of different talks, and that's what I tend to do at festivals anyway, go and dip in and out. And I'm talking to you today about circular fashion. What's it mean? What we can do it at home, and it's this sort of talk of 2 halves, as you can probably see. It's talking about what circular fashion is, and the second half, what we as consumers can get involved in that. And it's really interesting as well, because the session after us it's all about the repair cafes, and I think you're going to find that a lot of some of the things that we talk about in terms of good design are going to be things that are going to be addressed in the next session as well. You know, this whole idea of fixing and mending stuff that's maybe doesn't go the whole distance. So what is circular fashion? So in order to talk about it, I'm going to talk briefly about the circular economy, as this is kind of essential to understanding the rest of the talk. But don't worry, it's not going to be a big sort of like meaty economic detour. I realise it's 6 p.m. on a Friday night, and there is anything that I mentioned in the talk, they're included in some resources that I've listed on our website, so you should be able to find those really easily. So the circular economy, so what actually is it? So the good news is I've got a really good example of the circular economy that's been around for thousands and thousands of years, and that is of course nature. Nature is a big perfect circular economy. There's no waste in nature, there's no pollution in nature, and if we talk about the economy, what I really like is this idea of economy, what the ancient Greeks used to describe, which is household management. So it's like the way you look after your home. And I actually studied something, I studied home economics at school when back in the day, and to think about that now, the whole idea of doing home economics or home household management is a little bit crazy. It just goes to show how the terminology has changed. So nature is really good at managing all its own resources. And when I went back to school at the age of 28, when I went back to college, I was taught by this most amazing woman called Patricia Wiltshire. I decided that I wanted to go back and learn all those things about the environment I hadn't learned about before. And Patricia Wiltshire is an amazing woman. She knows all about pollen. She solves murders, solves crimes through pollen analysis, which is a whole separate talk. But she was so inspiring for me. And I remember the moment the penny dropped for me was when she said to me, wow, nature is the original and the best recycler. Because if you think about it, everything that's on the earth is still on the earth. And she said, in your eye could be a tiny remnant of a dinosaur's tooth. And isn't that amazing? And that was a real light bulb moment for me, just to understand why nature is brilliant. So circles are good, because what make nature work, and they make it. That a circular economy is like nature. It's a system, it doesn't have waste, it doesn't have pollution. It's a good system because it keeps all those products in use for longer. If you think about those trees in the last slide, those trees are going to be around for a long time. They're going to provide habitats for lots of things and so on. And it's a system that is regenerative, which means that when those trees eventually die, they go into the ground and those nutrients are reabsorbed into the earth and they get turned into something else. So what happens is with humans, we reinvent the economy, and we'll take a linear approach. So we have something which we call, which we describe as a take, make, and waste economy. So we take stuff from nature, we make stuff with it, clothes, furniture, electronics, packaging, and then when we're done, we just chuck it. It goes into waste, it goes into landfill, and or it gets incinerated. And as we all know, there's no kind of magic place where it all goes. But the more we take from nature and the more we dump on nature, the less that nature is able to function and do all those wonderful things that it does so well. And we as humans, we created these brand new products, brand new complex products that we can't actually recycle. I mentioned electronics. We know a lot about plastics, and of course the subject of this talk, which is clothes. And if you want to think about the linear economy in this sort of, in terms of the fashion world, it looks a little bit like this. And this is a lovely diagram produced by a lady called Teslin Dowd, an American fashion designer, really knowledgeable about the circular economy and how it fits into the fashion industry. And what you've got here is this, some of you may recognize if you've ever worked in the fashion industry, we know anyone who works in the fashion industry, is, you know, you get raw materials, they go in at the end, at the beginning on the left-hand side, they get used to make clothes, go into production, they get sold, we as consumer buy them. Here we use them, and when we finish them, we dispose them, and they may get downcycled. But at the end of the day, we end up on the right-hand side of this diagram. So there is some movement. Here on the left-hand side, brands are starting to be a little bit more aware. They're starting to buy textiles that have a good history, organic cotton, and so on, and so on. But ultimately, that's where the change is starting to happen. So just going to move on here. So where we sort of came up with this is taken from our little booklet, a little leaflet that we did. It's a 4-page leaflet. You can find it on our website just to illustrate the problem with the fashion industry. We know the problem with plastics is really well known, but I would argue that the textile industry deserves as much our attention as the plastics industry, and possibly more. And the reasons for that, as you can see, if I think about a t-shirt I can buy, or used to be able to buy in Primark for a couple of quid, a couple of years ago, a year ago. You think about all those actual costs, the cost to nature that we were talking about that go into making that. 2,700 litres of water are needed to grow the cotton that goes into a t-shirt. There's lots of impacts around when we dye a fabric, that causes a lot of freshwater pollution. And many other problems, pesticides. If your t-shirt's got a bit of polyester in it, of course we know that polyester is made from a fossil fuel. You're wearing polyester, you're wearing fossil fuels, and we know that that's not good. And this leaflet was inspired by a visit I had almost a year ago, and it was to a museum called Fashion for Good in Amsterdam. And it really got me inspired to sort of think about the true cost of the t-shirt. So, but I mentioned all the reasons why fashion is something that deserves our attention. So I talked about pollution, but the other reason, which I've just kind of mentioned here, with this workers' rights, and that is, of course, that the industry has been absolutely terrible in terms of workers' rights, and we only ever find out about these things when disasters such as the Rana Plaza disaster, which happened on the 24th of April 2013, occurred, where over 1,138 people died, many more were injured. Most of these were women. So this is not only a kind of human rights issue, this is also a gender rights issue. And most of the women that make the clothes that we buy, 80% of them are 18 to 24-year-old women. And that's not just in countries like Bangladesh and China. There's quite a big textiles industry in the UK as well. So the Rana Plaza disaster, which I'm not going to talk too much about, but it was a real wake-up call for the fashion industry. And it's still a problem, though, in terms of the human rights issues to do with the fashion industry at the moment. There is a whole issue about the fact that a lot of workers are not being paid. There's an organisation called cleanclothes.org who is updating us on the situation where you have Western companies, Western clothes retailers who have bought clothes and they've been imported and they're sitting unused and unworn, obviously, and unbought in our shops at the moment. But those workers who put together those clothes haven't yet been paid for those clothes. They haven't been paid their wages for those clothes. So as you can see, it's a huge problem. And then finally, on top of that, the other issue compared with, say, plastics or electronics is that there isn't any legal requirement at the moment to take back clothes. Now, you may not realise this, you might not believe it, but within the plastics industry, there's actually quite a lot of legislation requiring companies to do something about their packaging to make sure that they take it back and recycle it. And it's a similar sort of thing within the waste electronics industry as well. But this sort of legislation doesn't really exist at the moment for the clothes industry. And on top of that, we're buying more clothes. There's a sort of take-back scheme in front of us here, collection scheme, but to me that doesn't look like healthy recycling, and I'm sure it doesn't look like healthy recycling to you. But as consumers, certainly in the UK, we're pretty shocking when it comes to clothes buying. We actually buy more clothes per head than any other country in Europe, and including nearly twice as much as the Italians, who are probably more known for their fashion sense than we are. So, and there's a figure that lots of figures are banded around in the fashion industry about waste and about recycling. And one of the figures that has been used in the past was that 76%, only 76% of clothes end up in incineration or landfill. And I'd argue that it's probably actually quite a lot higher. It's more like over 99%. I'll explain that a little bit later. You might actually say, well, hold on, I take my clothes to a charity shop and the charity shop is recycling, you know, that's a way of recycling. Just as I put my glass out in my household recycling, I'm also recycling my clothes and they are reused. Yes, you are. Yes, you're separating them, but there's a whole world of difference between clothes going to a different destination and them actually being used, recycled. So there's a difference. What happens, whereas your household recycling with your glass will obviously be melted down, it will get turned into a new product. What happens when you send your clothes off to be recycled at a charity shop is that they will get used as they are, if they can, and if they can't, they may be sold abroad, and then there's huge problems with that. And I know a few other speakers at the festival have alluded to this. Clothes get taken abroad, they get sold abroad, but what happens at the end of the life of the clothes then is that now we have a situation where we in the UK have probably imported an item of clothing from China or Bangladesh. We've worn that clothes. We haven't managed that as a waste problem. That waste problem has now been exported to a country like Ghana, where they may get to wear the clothes for some time, but then they have to deal with the waste. So, and the other thing you might think about is what about upcycling? And we've seen there've been fantastic examples of upcycling, and I'm really, really jealous because upcycling isn't something I'm terribly good at. I tend to do very kind of functional repairs, and I'll come on to that in a minute. But upcycling is good, but it's not circular fashion as such. And the reason for that is because if you go back to our example of nature, when your tree dies, it doesn't sort of become another tree. All its nutrients, all the parts of its nutrients go back into the earth. They get reabsorbed into the earth, and they get, and then they get regenerated into a new living thing. And it could be another tree, or it could be bits of trees. But the fact is, you don't chop down a tree and make another tree out of it. Just in the same way as if you want to be truly circular in fashion, it's not the garment that has to be recycled. It's all the materials that are used to make up the entire garment. So to be truly circular, and oh yeah, sorry, I'll just explain the difference again between upcycling and circular design. So upcycling is something we do. We design with waste. So an item is already it's something we're looking at and go, oh, okay, I can't wear that as it is, so I have to do something with it. So it uses the garment materials as they are. And no matter how hard you try, and I noticed that even Erin, who gives the fantastic Erin Lewis Fitzgerald, even mentioned this about this ever-increasing pile of bits to patch other bits on. No matter how well you are upcycling, there is going to be an element of waste when you upcycle. And that has to be landfilled or incinerated at some point. And even the item that you're upcycling is going to eventually be landfilled or incinerated. Whereas if you have a circular design, an item that is designed with a circular point of view, you are already designing out the waste. So you design it, the designer is thinking about the end of the life of their item. So they're designing it in such a way that it's either made out of a single material. So if it's made entirely out of cotton, then it can be composted ultimately, especially if that cotton is ethical cotton. It's been sourced from that the cotton itself is ethically sourced, it's grown without pesticides, and the dyeing processes in it are non-damaging to the environment. So the material can be composted. So the waste is designed now at the beginning. The materials can easily be disassembled, or they are made out of a single type of material. And those materials, that's the important thing, it's the nutrients within the materials that get turned into the new materials rather than the garment itself. So no waste is created. And that's not to say that upcycling is bad. As I said, it's a really, really important part of the journey. There we go. And if you were to take this example of circularity and you look at a pair of jeans, for example, so jeans, if a pair of jeans was made entirely out of cotton, and not like the jeans I'm wearing today, which is stretchy, so they've got a bit of lycra in them, then you would be able to compost those jeans. And this is an example here. There's this little button on the back, which I feel that's sorry. Okay, I'm going to move on. So I missed one of my slides. So the circular economy is something that happens, doesn't really happen very rarely. I sort of moved on from my slide, but that's not to worry because we're going to come back to that. There are some examples of companies are truly circular, and this is one example, which is Rapa Nui at the Isle of Wight. And if you look closely at the label, you can actually see that they ask you to send back the item at the end of its life, and you can get a little bit of money off it. But that's not what we have most of the time. Most of the time we have something that looks a little bit like this. This is another version of the diagram that appeared just in the last but one slide. Instead of it being entirely circular, we're doing really, really well. So we start here with our raw materials, we make something out of it, we try to make something out of it. We as a customer will buy it, we wear it, we wash it, we wear it, we wash it, so on and so on. It's like instead of the brand taking, we seem to be, we seem to be doing a lot of heavy lifting here. We seem to do quite a lot of work of the brand here, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But ultimately, what happens to our garment is it does get downcycled, so it ends up in landfill no matter what we do with it. We can work really, really hard to here, but ultimately it doesn't go back to the brand. So, how can we be circular as consumers? And I'm hoping what I've hopefully illustrated is that actually it's not really our problem as consumers to solve. When we recycle and upcycle and try and keep items in use, it's fantastic. But the ultimate problem is that this item is going to end up as waste, and that actually is the brand's responsibility. So. But what can we do as consumers? We do have influence. We have influence a little bit here. We can buy items that are all where brands are already thinking about the raw materials that go into the garment we're buying. We buy items where maybe they're fair traded. We know where the items come from. We choose items that are maybe well made and that are going to last, timeless pieces, and so on. And as well, we're going to make sure that when we wear our items, we can make sure that we don't overwash them. There's lots of things that you can do here. And this is another part of our little leaflet that we made at Planet Aware. Really, really simple things you could do. Just wearing your clothes for longer is surprising how. I'm not talking obviously about underwear and stuff like that, but a pair of jeans or a jumper, just wear it for longer without washing it. Just is a really simple way of reducing its impact. Dry your clothes, you're going to wash them, dry them in the outdoors and so on. Use conditioner. I've met so many people who work in the fashion sector say conditioner is a terrible, terrible thing and a pointless thing for our clothes. So just don't use it, really. Another area that we as consumers can do a lot, which is, and we do a lot, is this section here, this whole resale, return, reuse. And I know with you, Jen, that your journey began with this whole concept of buying nothing new, which is the idea of reuse, buying secondhand, reusing, swapping, and so on. And it's really interesting because in a proper circular economy, this take-back role where you have resale and repair and reuse would actually be done by the brand. And interestingly, there are some brands out there that are doing that. As part of Fashion Revolution Week, I contacted a few brands. I just put a single tweet out, and from 4 or 5 brands that I knew had been in my wardrobe or were still in my wardrobe. And one of them came back to me, and that was Baden. And really, really interestingly, they sent me a whole load of information. They said, get in touch with us, send us an email, which I did. And I thought, right, okay. Sent them a whole list of questions, and they went into detail about how they do offer quite a lot of things here that I wouldn't have expected a lot of brands to offer. So, for example, you can go and get your Baden item repaired. You can drop into a shop and leave it with them, and they will sort that out. They do have a take back scheme. Other companies do that, like Marks and Spencer's, and it's starting to become something that is very much expected, seen as good. Good to offer the consumer. But generally, I would say that most of the heavy lifting here is done by people like us, people who look at an item and they think, well, actually, I need to get the most out of it. I need to keep this item in use. So through repair, through reuse and resale, so either shopping at charity shops or taking stuff to charity shops, or getting involved in things like clothes swaps or switching, even selling your clothes through eBay or whatever it is, so even lending to a friend. So every item that you sell on eBay is another item that is being reused. And every item that you swap with a friend, you know, you say if you've got a friend who's going to a wedding or whatever, every item that you lend out to a friend is another item that doesn't need to be bought, and so on. You know, when we take our clothes to clothes swap because we don't like wearing them anymore, you know, that is another example of an item that is being reused, and so on. And interestingly, you see the statistic quite a lot that 1/3 of the items in the average wardrobe are just not being worn, and I think that's probably true. I think that's probably the case for me as well. And it's really important to go and just kind of really challenge yourself. You know, are you going to wear this? Why not? What's the problem? Is it a repair thing? In which case, you know, set aside time to repair it. And if it's not, if it's because you've just fallen out of love with it, there will be someone who will love that item of clothes. In terms of giving your stuff to a charity shop, I think we just have to be brutally honest with ourselves, which is that a lot of the stuff that ends up in charity shop is just maybe us feeling a little bit guilty that we haven't been able to find a use for it. But if you're going to give stuff to a charity shop, really make sure it is good quality, in good condition, it's clean, if it's, you know, it's not missing any buttons, it's got no tears or whatever, because people will only want to, and ask yourself the question, would anyone I know wear this? You know, and if they would wear it, then give it to them anyway. But if I took this to a charity shop, would I or anyone that I know genuinely buy this? Because there is a lot of stuff that ends up in the charity shop, and I think the figure that I've seen recently from trade, which is 30% of it will be sold in the UK, and the rest will either go abroad or it will be turned into rags. So this whole downcycling process that I talked about. So repair is a really interesting one for me because, as I said, there have been lots and lots of talks about upcycling, really interesting and lovely talks. Erin's one this morning, which I was really interested that she actually shared that she used a pair of her old pants to do a repair. And I thought, well, go Erin, that's brilliant. For me, repair, the key thing about repair, if you are going to repair an item within the principles of the circular economy, you need to work hard to keep that item working as its original purpose for as long as possible. And I'm going to illustrate that. When I was thinking about what do I repair at home, what actually came up is I thought of 2 items, and both of them weren't actually mine. Both of them I had repaired for my partner, and I'm going to just show you one of this. This is his dressing gown. This is now, don't give me too much away. This is over 30 years old, and this is something that my dressing gown. My partner was really keen that his parents bought for him when he was young. It was one of those things where they said, it's really expensive, you better wear it. And he said, I'm going to wear it. And of course, here we are 30 plus years later, and he's still wearing it. And so he started off with this gift, which was like a real big deal from his parents. And then about 10 years ago, he said to me, oh, I think this has got holes in it now. So you can probably just see if I hold them up. This is an item that's starting to kind of fall apart a little bit. and I love it and I want to carry on wearing it. So I looked at it and I thought, what can I do with this? So the simplest thing was just to buy something that looked a bit like a little tiny bit of fabric, and I just put a yoke in the back, and that item is now going to continue in its life for 35 years now. I'm probably going to have to do another bit of mending there, as you can see. But if we think about that, what that repair has achieved in terms of our circular economy is extended that item's life by so many years. And I think the average at the moment that we wear an item for is about 3 years. So if you're wearing something for 30 years and have been able to do it because of your repairing, that is the equivalent, in my book, very poor maths, I know, it's like wearing an item, 10 times over. So repair where it makes sense, repair where you know it's going to be worn, and repair in a way that the wearer will want to carry on using it and wearing it. I've got another example here, which is just a kind of a little repair that I did with some bias binding on a cuff. And those two repairs I know work because they're being worn as they originally were being worn. I'll give you another example of something that maybe didn't work. Kind of years ago, I was like messing around and I thought, well, I had, again, it's my partner's, an old pair of jogging bottoms. And I looked at this pair of jogging bottoms and I tried, the elastic had gone, and I tried to mend them, not very well. But then I thought, oh, I could just turn it into this. So I turned it into a hot water bottle cover, right? Which is lovely and I love it. But what I should have done, what I have done, as I sort of illustrated earlier, is I've created a whole lot of waste that went with this item. So if I had worked within the principles of the circular economy, I would have worked a lot harder to make sure that this item, this pair of jogging bottoms, carried on its original life, because actually fundamentally, apart from the elastic, it was probably still a pretty good pair of jogging bottoms, and that was the only reason that it wasn't being worn. So that's just a couple of examples about upcycling. Again, upcycling isn't circular. You get a lot of people who are sort of claiming, I'm not saying that this, certainly by no means nobody that was speaking at this event this week sort of suggested that, but sometimes commercially I think things that are being upcycled are sold as being part of the circular economy, and that's not really the case. They play an important role within the circular economy, and as you can see within these loops, but they are not a circular solution themselves, and that's because we as consumers can't solve that problem. So I'm just going to grab a drink of water. So it's quite strange because all I can see on my screen are my slides. So that's quite an odd sensation for me to not be able to see anyone else. So just in terms of repair is probably may not be so important in terms of managing the volume of clothes that we consume, but ultimately, they done well, it has a massive potential to extend the life of an item. And even extending the life of clothing by an extra 9 months or so could reduce its carbon, waste and water footprints by something like, between sort of 10 and 30%. So it's really, really worth doing. And I would recommend that you check your wardrobe once a month. What's stopping you wearing the clothes? Put a note on it. When did you last wear it? And remedy that thing. So here we are, just to summarize sort of the difference between repair and upcycling. Simple garment, what simple improvements would make you wear the item for longer? Mend the garments that matter. I've got a pile of socks which I feel really guilty about because I try and mend them and they don't mend very well because of the way they're made. And actually, ultimately, if I sort of focus on the stuff that really matter, that would probably be better. And as I said, keep the items in their current form for as long as possible. So I'm nearly there at the end of my talk. I've talked about the things that we could do in this part of circle. I think there's more that we could do as consumers, and that is probably, it's about that little bit of tiny activism. And I know that Jen talks about sort of activism-ish as part of the sustainable-ish kind of approach. And that is actually, we need to start challenging our brands. We need to say, come on, guys, how are you going to sort this out? How are you going to take you know, the items that we've worn and that we use, and we have worked really, really hard to keep into use. We've repaired them, we've reused them, we've sold them on eBay or whatever, and we've shared them with our friends. What are you as brands going to do to you know, put in the missing part of this circle? And interestingly, I had a couple of tweets just before I came on, just to mention the 2020 circularfashion.com. So this is a new website. It's a new pledge that brands are starting to wake up, you know, to. As I mentioned, you know, they are starting to think at the start of the process about the cotton and the fabrics and the materials that they make their clothes from, and making them more sustainable. But now they're just beginning to wake up to the sort of this idea, you know, this whole idea that actually it's more than just what happens at the beginning of the process. It's more than just what happens in terms of reuse and recycling. There is a waste problem that needs to be solved. So I'm really interested to see how this initiative develops. But I think what we could do as consumers is that we can actually ask our brands what they are going to do about the problem. Yeah, and I think that's the one thing that I will start doing from next year is to kind of, you know, really, really sort of urge my brands to and ask them, you know, what is it that they understand by circularity and what are they doing about it? And as I mentioned before, I had a little email, I had contact from Bowden, and of all the things that they mentioned to me, all these elements of take back and donating items, they donate a lot of their items to good causes, they have their mending, but what they didn't touch on was this end of life issue. So, and I would be really interested to know, just in the same way as people take back plastic packaging to a supermarket, for example, has anyone actually taken back an item of clothing? I'd really like to know, have they taken back an item of clothing and said to a consumer, this is finished with, now what are you going to do with it? And if they do, please let me know. So there we go. That's it in a nutshell. Circularity is something that we can be involved with as consumers, and I'm pretty sure that you all will be, but it's also something that needs to change in a big picture way, and that is something that we can also as consumers have a role in influencing. And I don't think that we should be afraid of taking back an item that we maybe, you know, bought secondhand. Just because we bought it secondhand, it is still ultimately the brand's responsibility to solve that waste problem. So there we go. I'm just going to run through a couple more slides. A little, so at Planet Aware, we support the Marine Conservation Society through beach cleans. We do, when we do our beach cleans, we do the Marine Conservation Society survey, which helps us to understand what sort of waste is out there and lobby for government. And they've got a little campaign at the moment called Stop Ocean Threads. So there's, when you wash an item of clothing, if it's made out of polyester or any other fossil fuel based plastic fabric, then there's something like 600,000, 700,000 microfibers could end up in the wastewater. So they've got this campaign at the moment, just a little petition to government asking them to bring forward legislation which puts, you know, will see microfiber filters installed in washing machines, and that will be presented at the most appropriate time. Now is not the most appropriate time to present it, but it's still a good thing to sign now. So I just want to say, listening, I hope you're still with me. If you want to find any more resources from the talk, they're all on Planet Ware's website. You find them under resources. If you want to get in touch with me directly, that's my Twitter handle. And also finally, I just want to just give a little plug for a Planet Aware project that we're running called My Planet, My Voice. And at the moment, we're asking people to share positives or, you know, during the lockdown, during the difficult time that we've experienced in lockdown, is just that if they've captured a photo while they've been out on a walk or something like that, a really positive response to nature, or even any of the things that you've suddenly, you know, taken up, upcycling or mending or whatever, you know, share those experiences as well. And you'll find information about that on our website under there's a section at the top called during COVID-19, and then there's a link to My Planet, My Voice and the various projects that are being run under there. So if you feel like having a look, please do. That's it for me. So if you are interested in anything, do get in touch, and I look forward to your questions.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Anne. I've popped the links to well, I've put the Planet Aware website was much higher up, and then I've just shared My Planet, My Voice as well, if people want to come and share that. Where you were talking about the microfiber campaign from Marine Conservation Society, have you tried like the guppy bag and those sorts of things or not?
Do you know what? I must admit I haven't personally, because I'm wary about products that solve other problems, because I did this thing where I bought these washing balls years ago, and they never worked for me. So I'm kind of steering away. So it's not so if that's something that someone else has done, I'd be interested to hear their responses. But what I would say is that the thing that I've really, really done is I've worked very, very hard to limit how often I wash my clothes. So that's sort of my response to that.
But things, I interviewed Martin Dorey, who's the founder of 2 Minute Beach Clean, for the podcast, and he said that, you know, we were kind of sold fleece jackets as an environmentally friendly option because they were from recycled plastic bottles, and isn't this amazing, and we should all support this. And then you know, years down the line, we're discovering that actually every time they washed there, but he said, you know, if you wash your fleece jacket once a month rather than once a week or twice a year or whatever, you know, like that in itself will be reducing that significantly. So if you have got synthetic clothes, you know, I'm wearing a synthetic jumper here. I said earlier, it's a Primark jumper, but it's from a charity shop. You know, like I think we do overwash, like, you know, I unless stuff is like had food splattered on it, I will often just sort of air it on the old chair drobe overnight and then pop it away. Well, it tends not to pop away, it all just accumulates on the chair drobe. But yeah, I think that's really interesting. There was a couple of questions, and one really interesting question, and I've got a bit to say on it, but I don't know if you have either. And Diane says, you know, in terms of the circular economy and reducing consumption and things, if we all stopped buying so much stuff, would that not cause employment problems worldwide? So I don't know if you've got anything.
I think, yeah, that's a really interesting problem. I think the thing is that change doesn't happen overnight. Change is something that happens really, really slowly. And yes, there is this sort of idea that, you know, if we're buying something, it's being made by a garment maker in Bangladesh, you know, or whatever, that they will automatically lose out as a result of that. But I think cumulatively, decisions don't happen like that. But I think the other thing is just to say, well, actually, could you, you know, it's about saying to your brands, well, you know, what is it you're paying your workers? How is that calculated? You know, are they being paid per item? In which case, you know, the question we really need to be asking is, you know, why are people being paid in a certain way? Why is payment related to throughput rather than something like, you know, the intricacy of the garment and kind of working on making a long-lasting garment? So I think there's a lot of questions really about sort of labour reform, which I'm not qualified to answer, but I think this goes back to, you know, the whole way that we are approaching fast fashion, which is, you know, get it on the shelves quickly, and as a result of that relates to how we pay for garments to be made, and yeah, that needs to be changed.
I hear this argument a lot, especially in relation to fast fashion. Like, you know, like by buying the fast fashion, it's keeping these people in a job, and if we didn't buy it, they wouldn't have a job. Well, also, but there's also the argument that if we didn't buy it and we told the retailers why we weren't buying it, they would book their ideas up and ensure that their employees were being paid a living wage and that they had a transparent supply chain and all those kinds of things. So it is a really double-edged sword. And I think in terms of moving towards a more circular economy, you're absolutely right. If we all stopped consuming like now, and, you know, and pretty much, you know, there has been a big drop in consumption because of coronavirus, but we're not saying that we're going to transform. Sadly, we're not going to transform from a linear economy to a circular one overnight. It is going to happen gradually, and there's going to be room for adaptation. But Sophie, who did one of our open mics, she runs an organisation called the Remade Network, and she did a really interesting study, or she's got some really interesting data around the number of jobs a green economy generates. You know, they have these like they had Remade in Edinburgh and Remade, and actually, you know, a green economy, and that's this whole thing about the Green New Deal that's coming out of the States, and you know, it actually generates, so they might not be the same jobs, yes, but it actually generates a huge amount of jobs as well. If you're interested, and I have to confess, I haven't got around to reading it yet because it scares me a bit. It feels a bit too.
It's on my book. It's on the further reading list.
Yes, exactly. Oh, is it? Have you read
yes.
it?
I started it recently, yes, because like, yeah, I thought, now is the time.
It feels quite hard work, so I haven't actually ploughed into it yet, but it's on my, you know, books that make me feel better about myself shelf.
Yes, she's got a TED talk as well, so if you don't want to read the whole book, the 20-minute TED talk is a really good way. Yes.
And this concept of donut economics is about embracing the circular economy and how we can make that work as a financial system on a planet of finite resources. You know, this linear system is based on constant economic growth, which just I can't remember who it was. It might even have been Attenborough or someone, but there's this quote that like anyone who believes in infinite growth on a finite planet is either a madman or an economist or something like that. Yeah. And it's just so yeah, we do need to start to more than start, we need to really embrace different ways of thinking about the economy.
I'm really glad that you mentioned Kate Raworth though, because I was actually, when I was putting together some of this talk, I was actually thinking about how, her response to the economy, because she, the reason why she went to study economics is because she witnessed poverty, she saw poverty on television, she saw famine, and she said, how can I fix this? What's the best way to fix this? And the more she kind of looked into it, as a sort of teenager, kind of making decisions about where she was going to go in her life, the one thing that came up is I can fix it through economics. But it was only when she got to university and she started studying that she realized that the economics that was being taught didn't take into account all those other things. It didn't take into account, welfare. But actually, this idea of economics matching growth is only something that's been around since the 1930s. And you mentioned the Green New Deal, and actually the idea of it was to measure. It was for Roosevelt to measure the impact of his New Deal policies back in the 30s when we had the Great Depression, to see if they were actually working, to measure kind of how big the economy, how much money was being generated from one year to the next. And then suddenly it just became about that. So, originally the idea was just to see how well people who had been in poverty and doing really badly were doing, and then suddenly it just became about how much money we can make. And one thing is you'll find out in Kate Raworth's book is that even the economists that were originally sort of supportive of this whole idea of GDP and measuring success through how much money a country makes say, well, that doesn't tell us anything about how well off individual people are. And they look back at it and they can see its failings, and it also doesn't tell us anything about that unpaid element of the economy. Well, what was traditionally women, working in the home and making sure, that people got to work. But also a very interesting quote, I love this quote from the book, was, unpaid labour is the reason why all your workers come to work potty trained, which I think sort of sums it up for me.
Yeah, and there's loads of really wonderful chat going on there. And I think the story of stuff's got a nice thing about the sort of linear versus the circular economy as well. That's a really nice, easy piece to understand. I had a really, really good point that I was like, I really want to make that point, and I've completely forgotten it. Karen says, Diane says, it is really hard. You feel like you're making, there's never a perfect answer, and I absolutely agree with you. There isn't. There always feels like there's a payoff, and that comes right back to the very first talk that we had at the start of this week from Ray about our values. And for some people it will be plastic, or some people will put the fashion, slave labor and all that kind of thing at the top of their values, and it is just, and there's always going to be a compromise. Unfortunately, there isn't a kind of a sort of perfect solution, sadly, at the moment. And Margarita asks, what's the most biodegradable fibre? That's a really
that's a really, really good question. So if it's to be biodegradable, it has to be pure. So any fibre that is made out of purely natural, so if it comes directly out of nature, so cotton, bamboo. I know I've not done this myself, so I don't compost a lot of cotton, but I know that what's his name, who's talking this morning, Erin was talking about how she puts a lot of her cotton, bits and pieces of cotton on the compost heap. So my guess is that cotton is certainly a pretty biodegradable item. I would say as well, don't put whole kind of jeans on compost heap. If it's pieces of cotton and cotton that's already started to break down, start the process off. And I'm pretty sure bamboo would be, but I wouldn't recommend necessarily putting bamboo socks or anything like that on your compost heap, because I think you'd have to talk to someone who is a fibre specialist on this, but my understanding is that a lot of the stuff that is marketed as bamboo has been messed around with quite badly.
So the socks often have a bit of nylon added in to
they do. So and that's a problem. And also, if you want to put something on the compost heap, I wouldn't feel comfortable putting something that had necessarily been manufactured in a way that was using, bad dyes, lots of pesticides. So in a way, and it sounds terrible, is that, the stuff that you want to put on your compost heap, if you do want to put anything on your compost heap, ideally should be the organic cotton, undyed stuff, because it's not just about the biodegradability, it's also about the the nasties that are in the item as well. And so this is why, and I really want to kind of make this point is that it's not, we feel guilty, all of us feel guilty, but there's an 80-20 rule, that don't sweat over the last 20%, in a way, just say, walk away, say, this isn't a problem I can solve. And if you really want to do something about it, ask the person that made the problem in the first place to solve it, really. So
yeah, and it's the same with plastics, isn't it? Like, you can go so far, but ultimately we're not living in a system at the moment that allows us to get to that 100%. So Karen's made the really important point that, I said, oh, there's always going to be a compromise, and we have to remember not to beat ourselves up about that. That is, we reach a point where we've done all we can do, and that will vary as to what we can do from person to person and family to family. And we just don't live in a system that makes it easy for ourselves at the moment.
There's something really important I wanted to add, because it's something you mentioned, Jen, in one of the earlier talks, and I haven't really touched upon it. And I think it's a really, really important thing, and it's about conversations. And one of the things that you mentioned was you did a bit of mending of your jeans, and this goes back to this visible versus invisible mending. If you're mending for somebody, they might not wear an item that's got very visible mending, but if you choose to mend it for yourself, then what's going to make you wear it. But one thing you said was about using that as a conversation starter, and I think we should never underestimate the power of a single conversation. And I really loved that when you mentioned that, because that was something that I was hadn't kind of necessarily thought of. As I said, all my repairs tend to be kind of quite banal ones, so maybe I need to start repairing in a way that gets people to talk to me about, oh, that's interesting, what's happened there, and you could launch into whatever, and hopefully their eyes don't glaze over too much. So anyway, I just wanted to raise that as a
you
thing.
said about the that really important question of saying to manufacturers and retailers, obviously the Fashion Revolution campaign has this big thing every April, if people have come across it, and they ask people to, there's the hashtag who made my clothes, but obviously it's that, we also need to kind of be asking, like, what's in my clothes, and what's going to happen to my clothes, and supporting brands that are embracing the circular economy, like Patagonia are doing it really, really well. So if people are familiar with them, they're doing an awful lot of great work. I've remembered my amazing point, so I'm going to bore you with it for 2 minutes if anybody else wants to put their questions into the box. That you were saying about, the sort of concept of GDP and coming from Roosevelt and stuff, and actually, again, so that came from the 30s, and in the post-war years is when we really saw kind of this push for consumerism take off to try and rebuild economies after the war. And planned obsolescence, I don't know, people are familiar with that phrase. It's the idea that things are made in such a way that they kind of that they self-destruct after a certain amount of time, and that you can't buy spares for them, and you can't repair them, and all that sort of thing. I sort of thought, it's a bit of an urban myth, isn't it? But it was very much an intentional thing that was, it started with light bulbs. I think it was built, they realized that they were making these light bulbs that lasted years and years and years, and they weren't selling enough. So this consortium of like 5 light bulb manufacturers got together to decide they were all going to make their light bulbs have a finite lifespan. And it's kind of gone on from there. And, we really need to come back. And a website I'd recommend to people, if you're looking at things that are more about the circular economy being built to last, being built to be repaired, is Buy Me Once. I've mentioned it a couple of times this week, buymeonce.com, I think. And everything on there is kind of curated deliberately so that it's built to last, it's made to be repaired. They very much encourage, if they have someone apply to come on their website and they don't fulfill their criteria, they will help them. They will say, guys, you're doing a really amazing job, but actually could you consider having a repair service? And if you can incorporate that, then we can help you get that set up, and then you'll be able to come on the site. So yeah, really amazing these kinds of initiatives out there.
I know that the site you mentioned, definitely worth a look. The one thing I wanted to pick up was you mentioned light bulbs, apart from light bulbs, light bulb moments, but an example that maybe they didn't come across, I just want to mention this as well, that there's this idea around lighting. So I think Philips have done it, this idea of lighting as a service. So rather than you buying your light bulbs, is that you kind of basically lease your light bulbs, so that you buy a lighting service rather than light bulbs. So I think it's more of a commercial idea. So you just say, well, I need this much, this is my building, and they will provide you. So it's if it gets broken, it's like up to them to repair it and change it. You don't have to go back and buy a new one. You pay them for a service. So it's a really interesting idea, and I know this is something that is within the circular fashion world as well. It's this idea that you actually don't necessarily own your clothes. You kind of there's this sort of renting model, and there's lots of different models out there that you base.
And they think they do a rental one, don't they? And
which one's that? Sorry,
is it Mud? I can never remember which.
Oh, okay, no,
yeah, there's some that you essentially pay a price. They retain ownership of the jeans. You wear them, then you return them back, and they'll kind of use that materials to make a new pair of jeans, which is what we want it to stay within this, and like you say, not be downcycled and stuff. So absolutely amazing. Thank you so much, Anne. And I'm loving the way that it's not down to me at all, and I don't know if it was intentional because Mary organised the schedule, but all these talks on this last day seem to be feeding so nicely back into so many of the other things.
I was going to say, I did wonder if Mary had organised it, because it did seem to be the sort of thing she would have seen, oh, that fits in with that piece.
Yes,
so,
yeah. No, I can't take any credit for any of that cleverness. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me.
We've got the Repair Cafe talk at 7, so really looking forward to that. And then at 8 we've got the festival closer, so do come along to that, where I attempt to wrap up all of this amazing stuff. But yeah, and I'll post the replay in the group, and do come and on that thread post all your links and all that kind of thing as well. That'd be awesome.
Lovely. Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Right, good night, everyone.